Here's how to change the rear wheel bearing on a Toyota Camry. Now, this Camry is a 2012 with 145,000 miles on it, and you can hear a rumble sound from the back when I go above about 40 miles an hour. So I jacked it up the other day and spun the tires in the back. The passenger side felt great, but this side, you could tell the bearing wasn't in very good shape. So I went to rockauto.com and ordered this replacement from MOOG, and it was about $100. You can get them cheaper, but that was a good mix of quality and price. So I got the parts. I did, as you can see, I got all the tools out, and I chocked the front tires. And the next step is going to be to jack up the back end, put the jack stand underneath, and take the wheel off, and we'll go from there. Okay, so I've got the car jacked up with jack stands for safety, and this is a 1/2-inch impact gun with a 21 millimeter impact socket on it. So once the wheel is off, the next thing to do is get this brake caliper assembly out of the way. So there are 2 bolts that you got to remove that are 17 millimeters. This one right here, and there's another one just like it behind here, which is a little hard to see. But what's tricky about them is they're not easy to access. So what I found, it's a little bit of a specialty tool, but a 17 millimeter ratcheting box wrench with a swivel on it is perfect for this. Alright, so once the 2 bolts are out, you can remove the caliper assembly. Now you can just try to set it on here, but it can tend to fall. So what I did is I got one of these little flexi-doos, and I'm going to see if I can hang it up out of the way so I can work. And you want to make sure you don't stress this brake line too much if you can help it. Okay? So then you just take this guy off, and now you've got access to the bearing. And if I spin it, alright, so the next thing to do is to remove the speed sensor, the wheel speed sensor. Now, the connector is a little bit tricky. It's a 2-step process, and I'm going to try to demonstrate it as clearly as possible. So if you have a small flathead screwdriver, you can undo the snaps that hold this gray cover. And if you undo, so there's a little catch here and a little catch back here. You can undo those, and then you can pull this guy off. It's like a secondary retention. Now what's left is another connector. All right, so apologies in advance for the difficult angle, but what I'm doing is I'm using these pliers to squeeze the little lever that releases the catch, and I can just pull the sensor off like that. Okay. All right, so here's a close-up of what just happened. So these pliers were grabbing the housing on one side and this little tab on the other side. When you squeeze, it flexes open that little catch, which then releases the sensor, and you can just pull it off. And just ahead of time so we can see it better, this is how it's going to go back on when we reassemble it at the end, okay? You take your sensor, you stick it on, and it catches on the little catch in there, and now it's secure, and then you can go ahead and put the little plastic cover on over that just as another safety, and that also captures these little wires so they don't they're not exposed. So the next step is to remove 4 bolts that hold this assembly to the vehicle, okay? So you can see on the back there are these 4 spots where the bolts go, and you'll need a 14 millimeter socket or ratcheting box wrench or something to get those out from the back. And hopefully we won't have to take apart any of this parking brake hardware, but we might to get the whole thing out. So here are the 4 bolts that I just removed. So technically, there's nothing really holding this old bearing assembly in place. It should just be able to pull out, but it's really stuck on there from friction and probably some amount of rust. So what you gotta do is beat it off with maybe a mallet, but if you can swing it, getting your hands on a slide hammer puller kit, even if it's just to borrow it, will make your life a lot easier. This is mine, but you can rent or borrow them from auto parts stores without much difficulty. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take the deep flange and we're gonna put it on like this, and then put on our 3 lug nuts to hold it in place. Okay, now, since we're going to be using kind of a hammer action to get this off, you do actually want these to be tight, so the whole system is rigid and can't bounce. So, just, I'll tighten them up. Oops. Like that. So this is solid, okay? That's not going anywhere. Then we can take the hammer itself and thread it on like this. Okay, that's tight. And again, to make sure the whole system is tight, we will tighten that on there. Okay. Okay, so I recommend wearing earphones, ear protection for this part, but all you gotta do is take the hammer and just bang it. There you go. Alright, so this next part is just gonna be a little bit of cleanup and rust removal. So I've got brake cleaner and PB penetrating lubricant and a wire brush. So the first thing I'm going to do is clean up this section here, get all the rust out of it, and test to see if I can get the new bearing assembly to kind of fit in there a little more easily than it does right now, because just the last little bit of it is going to have to fit in there. And then after that, we'll have to work on disassembling this, like the brake and splash guard from the old bearing. So I'm spraying the PB penetrating fluid everywhere where this whole thing has to separate. So just kind of soak it everywhere. Success. It was really crude, but there we go. Okay, so separating the old bearing assembly from this flange that holds the brake and everything, that was not the prettiest, but once you've passed that point, you're past the halfway point and you're past the hardest bit of it, okay? So you want to make sure this surface is clean and you've cleaned the rust off of it. So is this surface here where the back of the new bearing will sit, okay? And same thing with this guy. You want to make sure all this is flat and free of rust, okay? Now for reassembly, I already took the new bearing and did wipe down the mating surfaces to make sure they were clean. But I did a test fit in here to stick this guy in. Now I had to be really careful, but it turns out it's not really a super tight press fit. There we go. So there actually is some play in there. So once you get these together, go ahead, make sure everything is clean on the back too. And then you can start reassembly in reverse order. All right, so now I've just got 2 of the 4 bolts on that hold all this together, but already you can tell that this sounds much better when I spin it. I don't hear bearings grinding or clanking around like I did before. So what you have to do from this point on is reassemble everything in reverse order, and don't forget the speed sensor. And when reassembling, you may want to consider using like an anti-seize lubricant on your bolts and torquing everything to the manufacturer spec. I don't have the manufacturer spec in front of me, except for I know the lug nuts are supposed to be, I think, 76 foot-pounds, but fact check me on that. But anyway, that is the process. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope it was helpful.